everybody. It is another awesome episode of Rock Talk with the DocRocker. I am Jeff Bonomo. I am joined once again, like I always am, with the DocRocker himself, Dan Tenorlato. Who do we have today in our Zoomiverse, and what are we talking about?
Yo, what's up, guys? DocRocker here. We're bringing my close friend and fellow coworker, Jonathan, on board to talk about some grunge. Because, you know, as long as I've known John, I know he's been a big grunge fan. And we could talk a little bit about that. You know, our karaoke days in the before time of, you know, going to the bar and singing Pearl Jam, and before COVID, yes. So we're just gonna gush out about grunge. So I'm gonna kind of pass a lot of this over to you two, because you guys know a lot more about it than I do. I mean, I was too young, you know, when grunge really hit its stride in the early '90s. I was still in diapers, so I really didn't get into it. And I never did. I just kind of missed it entirely. So I'm going to kind of just sit here and kind of take it all in. And hopefully our audience can too. And you guys kind of talk about some of the big acts and some of the culture of what's going on. I'll kind of jump in with a little bit of some things I do know about it, you know, given my teaching experience. You know, at a rock and roll school, I've had a lot of kids that were like, you know, like big Nirvana fans and Pearl Jam fans and stuff like that. So I know a little bit, but not much. So I'm going to pass it off to you guys.
Yeah, so you know the hits. You know, that's what we're gonna say. You know the hits.
Yeah, I know like the tip of the iceberg. I know the surface of it. I don't know anything else.
Well, okay, let's start back in the early times, the before times. Let's start back when I was just graduating high school. That's kind of when it came around, when I was like 17 years old, back in 1991, the year you were born. Really.
Yep.
You know, it actually predates 1991, but that's where it really took off.
Yeah, really hit its stride.
Or the Seattle sound, like some people call it. It's an alternative rock genre and subculture. It emerged like in the late 80s, I'd say, mainly through the American Pacific Southwest. Grunge fuses like elements of like punk rock, like classic rock, metal, also like. They kind of, there's not a lot of like slick production, at least there wasn't in the beginning. They kind of threw all that slick production away that really like personified 80s rock, you know, and they went like the other way. It was almost like an answer to like MTV shoving these hair bands down your throat. By the time 1991 came around, you know, the media had enough of that, you know, and
we're sick of it. Let's do something else. Yeah.
Right. You know, and that was a lot of it was the people in the music industry pushing for something new. But you know, I'm going to take this moment to thank one of our members of the Rock Talk with DocRocker Facebook group, CJ, who he mentioned that we can't talk about grunge without naming some of these bands like Black Flag, the Minutemen, Dead Kennedys, the Meat Puppets, Bad Brain, Circle Jerk. Sonic Youth, of course. There's a whole slew of them that I only know a little bit about, but I have to, you know, drop those names because that's where it came from. Also, Jane's Addiction was a big one, grunge. But the earliest proto-grunge stuff that a lot of people talk about is an album called Here Are the Sonics by the Sonics, and of course, more popular Neil Young's album, Rust Never Sleeps from 1979, has a lot of grunge influence to it. If you take a listen to those albums, you'll kind of hear where it came from, where a lot of it came from, I should say. Now lyrically, grunge is typically angst-filled and introspective, themes of like social alienation, self-doubt, abuse. You know, the big things that the 90s were all about. If the 80s were about fun parties, the 90s were about I'm so sad.
The 90s were like a hangover.
I have psychological. Yeah, it really was in many ways.
Parachute pants will do that to you. And too much hairspray, you know.
What's that?
Parachute pants. Too much hairspray.
I never sprayed up my hair.
No,
I never sprayed up my hair, but
I would have totally.
You know, back then I was.
Yes, you would have.
You probably. You know, honestly, by the time like 1991 came around, like I was sick of the Warrants and the Poisons and the Bon Jovis. You know, I was already transitioned into Iron Maiden. You know, still Black Sabbath and Megadeth and Metallica and Slayer and Testament, and like I was going that way. by the time I got out of high school, I was,
a lot of
that's
these
where I went.
giants that were already around for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, like I have to mention that thrash metal did get really big right around then too, but it fizzled out because in 1991 in came, 3 really, really big albums. And Nevermind by Nirvana, Pearl Jam's 10. There's not a bad track on that album. That's a fantastic album still to this day. And Soundgarden's Bad Motorfinger, that came out in 91 also. Great. Now that's a great metal album. That I don't even consider a grunge album.
Yeah, it's not a very grungy album.
But it's great. And it is like, I can still listen to any of those albums still. And we talked about a little bit back in our podcast we did for Dante's birthday of what was released in 1991. And we mentioned like Nevermind, like that's a great album filled with radio friendly singles. That like every song on Nevermind, it's made to be a radio single. And that's like, Danton even says like, teaching, it's easy to teach those songs because they're radio friendly,
because even like teenagers now, 20, 30 years later are really familiar with those songs. Like I remember even just like 5 or 6 years ago having like 15, 16-year-olds coming in like, oh, I want to do Smells Like Teen Spirit by Nirvana. And it's like, all right, as overdone as it is, there's a reason it's overdone because it's really, really good and it's really simple. And it's funny because like given like really big, like overplayed, overdone songs like that, a lot of like guitar teachers like myself tend to kind of despise those sorts of songs because it's like, oh, how many kids are you going to teach Enter Sandman before you get tired of it, But like in all my years teaching Smells Like Teen Spirit, never got tired of it. And the more I've actually ended up liking it more and more the more I taught it. So it's like, oh yeah, it's so simple and it's so concise and effective. And and we talked about this, like Jeff said back in the 91 episode of, I definitely I got to put that album on my wish list of stuff to check out because I don't know the rest of it. I only know Smells Like Teen Spirit, which is probably a major crime, it's compared to what I could be familiar with.
Well, you had like Smells Like Teen Spirit, In Bloom, Lithium, Come As You Are, Breed, and On a Plane. They were all big songs back in the day. I'd say that they probably had more hits on the radio and a bigger national following than Pearl Jam did and Soundgarden at that time.
Well, as far as the radio's concerned, like back then when that was released, like Smells Like Teen Spirit was everywhere. But as far as the musicians that I knew at the time, we started to latch on to Pearl Jam's 10 a lot more because that was like that was almost like a throwback album. It sounded like it had a great classic rock sound to it, and that's another reason why like you still hear Pearl Jam on classic rock radio today. You hear Alive and Even Flow and Jeremy because they're basically classic rock songs. So just it's a little bit different. You throw a flannel on the damn guy, and he's a grunge guy
and corduroy pants. Don't forget corduroy pants.
Well, I never wore them, but I did have a flannel around my waist for a while.
I mean, it seemed like Nirvana was way more mainstream. Just kind of like what if the cool kids or whatever were going to get into grunge, it was all like the most popular was Nirvana. But as far as like people are obsessed with music, I feel like Pearl Jam definitely won the title on that because they were they stuck to the basics of what grunge was, which was a reaction to overproduced bands that had lost their magic, the originalness of the music that they were playing, So I mean, Pearl Jam was always having fights with producers or ticket vendors or something about not liking the way the music industry was. And I think people, especially musicians, respected that back in the day.
If you listen to Pearl Jam 10, from a musician standpoint, there's a lot going on in that album, like musically from the two guitar players, and especially speaking from a drummer's point of view, the drums on Pearl Jam 10 are fantastic. I don't think that drummer ever played with Pearl Jam after recording that album. I don't think he ever played.
No, he went into like rehab or something. But the Pearl Jam had so many drummers, it's not even funny. They eventually ended up with Soundgarden's original drummer, I think, Matt Cameron.
Matt Cameron. You can't go wrong with Matt. But the first album, 10, was recorded by, and I can't remember the guy's name. I'm not going to look it up. But whoever recorded 10, there you go. Thank you. Whoever recorded 10 didn't go on tour with them then either. And you could tell at least for I can tell, the rest of the Pearl Jam albums after that have a different feel to them. And I say it's a lot because of that drummer, because what he did on Pearl Jam's 10, I think the guitar players were able to kind of work together with him, because there was a lot of little odd things he throws into those songs that to me are missing on Pearl Jam's second album and third album, and then I kind of lost them after that. It's a little bit different, a little bit more straightforward they became as they went on. But Pearl Jam's 10, fantastic album from first note to the last. I still love that album, absolutely.
That's probably like their only real grunge album. Versus started mixing elements of what you'd call alternative rock, and where rock was going. By Vitology, it had completely changed. That was such a different album than 10 and Versus. Not to say that Versus wasn't grunge, but like my favorite song was on Versus, Rearview Mirror. It's a great song. If you haven't heard it, I definitely suggest listening to it when you're
it's a great song. It's still a pretty good album. I probably have it on my collection still, but I was still a big Pearl Jam fan when the second album came out.
Like I was obsessed with them. Like I would go down to Repo Records in Bryn Mawr and buy bootlegs that were like, $50 to $100 from like Japan or wherever they were recording, because we didn't have the internet and all that other stuff. So if you wanted to hear anything non-album, especially with Pearl Jam, you had to buy it bootlegged.
Remember, I'm 47. I remember that really well.
I bet.
I remember before the internet, where like you had to talk to people who were into stuff, and you had to go search it out. There was a great place down at the in the Frackville Mall, I believe. It's called Musical Memories or something. This little stand in the middle of the mall. The guy would sell all kind of like really cool bootlegs you couldn't get anywhere else. Oh man, I spent so much money down there for all kind of
there was probably
bootlegs.
Those kinds of places just sprinkled all over the map.
Oh, absolutely.
Like every
that was
Northeast PA, Southeast PA. Probably
everybody had their own little
Ohio
local repo shop.
Hazelton had Bugsy's Hop. Yeah, it was a great place.
Yeah, I'm too young to remember any of that. By the time I got into music and was like super into it, the internet was already here, and I was in the LimeWire generation. All of us, just downloading stuff off of LimeWire and FrostWire, contracting viruses every other week on our computers, just trying to find
a button that says I got a virus from LimeWire.
Yeah.
That's not a joke, dude. I wrecked a couple of my old computers through LimeWire.
Oh yeah, so did I. Well, I think we were all guilty of it, because it's like, you can just download anything. Oh my god, this is amazing! Yeah. And then you just, next thing you know, crashes. In
the before LimeWire, that was the only way to do it, was to go and get bootlegs. Now the cool thing about Pearl Jam was they let hi there, how are you?
How are you?
We're talking about Pearl Jam. Well, what I was going to say was, Pearl Jam was they were fine with bootlegs. Like, they were kind of like, they took a page out of the Grateful Dead, and they're like, bootleg whatever you want, basically. And bands before that didn't do that. They, wanted you locked up if you bootlegged a show. Yeah. Pearl Jam didn't really care.
Well, that's because they were at war. They were at war. I mean, they hated the record companies. I mean, they would rather mom and pop record, CD, well, actually it was tapes back when I first started with grunge. I don't think Dan knows what the tape is.
No, I know what cassette tapes are.
Did you actually have any? Did you have a cassette tape player?
But my first couple of Kansas albums were on cassette. My first car didn't have a CD player in it, so I did cassettes for...
Wasn't one of your Maiden ones a cassette?
No, I never had a Maiden cassette. All my Maiden albums are CD. But yeah, I had a bunch of...
And a record. You have a record.
I do have a record, and I still have that record, and I have that record in a very safe place.
Good.
Now I don't have a record player and can't listen to it.
You can bring it over here. I'll let you listen to it. I got a record player.
Yeah, we'll have to do that one of these days. Yeah, a couple... When was it? About maybe like a year or two ago, John went to like some kind of record convention and got me a copy of Maiden's A Matter of Life and Death.
Nice. Yeah, I got a few records in my collection. I got a record player a few years ago for Christmas. I like listening to records. It's fun. It's different.
Amoeba Records. You probably know that. Amoeba Records in LA.
Mm-hmm.
That's like, it's right in Hollywood. everybody like loves it. There's like graffiti all over the place. It's pretty cool.
What we just talked about was pretty much what they were into like taking like what the establishment said was what you should be doing and throwing that out the window. And Pearl Jam was doing that, like you said, with the record companies, and they're doing that with Ticketmaster too. They're fighting that big fight with Ticketmaster.
Yeah.
You know, you got, you know, Nirvana, who didn't even want to be famous, apparently, you know, you know, and well, what I got to say about Soundgarden is, man, no one sings like Chris Cornell. You know?
Yeah, he's got an amazing voice. If I had to pick a second favorite, it'd be Soundgarden. They were amazing.
And then he
Now,
also
after-
did Audio Slave, right? Wasn't that like
Yeah.
his second band or whatever?
Yeah, Audio Slave was great too. And it was
Yeah,
very
I consider
grungy.
grunge,
That was
or
the
is that
only
part?
grungy music you could listen to post this era was Audio Slave. It was
So
great.
they kind of kept grunge alive with Audio Slave. Is that the idea?
It seemed like
Yeah,
it a little bit.
I guess you would call it kind of. Some of it was grungy, but I mean, you had the guys from Rage Against the Machine playing. It basically was Rage Against the Machine with a different singer.
Yeah.
They
Ah,
did,
I didn't know
their
that.
style of music was different,
Huh.
which was pretty impressive. But you know, back then, you know, as we leave 1991 and go into 1992, there's the second wave, or the second year of grunge being popular. You had Alice in Chains' "Dirt" come out.
Mhm.
Now, that's not my favorite album by them, but the great songs on there are great. It's strange, it's odd, it's interesting. You know, you had Stone Temple Pilots' "Core," which was an awesome album, very,
Yeah.
very metal influence too, very heavy compared to the rest of their stuff. Because like STP like released "Core," which pretty much is a metal album, you know, with grunge influence, and then they kind of went into more alternative rock sounds. And they kind of, you know, they weren't as heavy after that first album, really. But I do have to note, though, everyone wore flannel back then, even Megadeth. If you look at pictures of Megadeth from like 1992, man, they're wearing flannels, and like, everyone got into the flannel thing. It was a culture thing. It was
was
a
pretty
pop
big.
culture. Yeah, you know. I've seen pictures of bands that at the end of the 80s they had their hair teased up, you know, and this was like their promo photo in 1989. And in 1992, their hair's straight down in their face and they're wearing flannels around their waist. They're the same band though. You know, I've seen I saw stuff like that happen, you know, with a lot of bands, even on the local level when I started, because that's kind of around the time I started playing in bars with cover bands. Like there was a shift to what we were playing. You know, we still played some 80s hairband rock stuff, but you know, we're throwing in Pearl Jam, we're throwing in Alice in Chains, we're throwing in STP, and most people stopped teasing their hair. Like I said, I never did that, but you know, it came close to sure.
What would you categorize? I know the Stone Temple Pilots is grunge, but it sounds different than most. It sounds different than Pearl Jam and Nirvana and Soundgarden. What's going on with that?
I think it's just like a wide net that was cast. Like everything that came out that was even remotely popular was given the grunge label, I think, you know, or alternative rock.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah. The musicians hated the term grunge, by the way. I mean, that was just something coined by producer Sub Pop.
Yeah.
And they just wanted something. It was supposed to be grimy, dirty, like you just got up your couch and started playing or something, which it kind of was.
And that's what it was. You know, you just get done cutting your lawn and you go and play a gig. That's pretty much the style that it was.
Nice.
And even stage shows got dropped down to next to nothing. I saw a lot of these bands live back then, and the stage shows were
kind of minimalist, right? Yeah.
Oh, real empty. You know.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. No crazy elaborate sets and pyrotechnics and all that kind of crazy
right.
makeup and spiked hair and all the nuts stuff. Neon.
That
was all.
I saw Stone Temple Pilots open for Megadeth in Allentown, and STP got booed off the stage.
Really? What year was this? Was this early in the 90s?
Probably 92. It was right when Core came out. Yeah, 92, 93.
Oh, okay.
They didn't release Plush yet. That song did not get onto the air, the radio yet. It was before Plush. I think they just had a sex type thing out. But don't put STP to open for Megadeth, especially back then.
Yeah.
At that point, they would have been polar opposites because Megadeth was just as much like over the top crazy thrash as anything else, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if they're anything then, like when I saw them in 2016, like it's a pretty elaborate stage show, you know, like big projector, all kinds of video stuff, and crazy, you know, crazy lights and tons of stage mechanics and stuff. It's almost like Maiden, not quite on the same caliber as Maiden as far as crazy.
Right.
You know, there's no like gigantic jet engines coming out over the stage and nothing like that. But Megadeth does have quite the number of, you know, elaborate theatrics.
And in the beginning of the 90s, they were still on top, we'll say. They were still doing what they did. Countdown to Extinction was probably the album tour I saw them on when I saw them open, or I saw Stone Temple Pilots open for them. But just a year or two later, I saw STP at another gig, Harvey's Lake, with the Butthole Surfers and the Flaming Lips. Nice. That was a great concert, you know. Everything just took off, you know. So by a year or two later, man, it was just all grunge and alternative rock. That's what was going on.
They didn't know where to put them early on.
Yeah. No, yeah, had no idea. The Clash of the Titans tour with Megadeth and Slayer and Anthrax and Alice in Chains, like, you know, 2 years before. Alice in Chains didn't belong on that tour. You know, so but next thing you know, they're like one of the biggest things, you know, a couple years later. I also have to mention the movie Singles, you know, by Cameron Crowe. That was like a slice of life, pretty much, of what was going on in Seattle at the time. I haven't seen the movie, God, in 25 years probably, so I can't say if it's any good or not. I remember not really liking it, but because I love Cameron Crowe stuff, there was
a lot of relationship stuff in it.
Yeah, like I said, I like Cameron Crowe. I like most of his stuff. It's just that movie, I don't know, just those people were kind of around my age, and it was like, I'm not doing that. I don't want to hang out with those people. They're not the people I like to hang out with. But then again, I was also getting into heavier and heavier music at the time. So, but the soundtrack is good. You know, you have Wood by Alice in Chains, Breathe by Pearl Jam, Seasons by Chris Cornell, and you have the Battle of Evermore by the Lovemongers, which is actually the two ladies from Heart, doing an excellent cover of Led Zeppelin's Battle of Evermore. Mother Love Bone, I can't forget to mention them. Chloe Dancer
of Pearl Jam.
Yeah, the original Pearl Jam. Pretty much.
Yeah. That was before Eddie. They were called Mother Love Bone.
Yeah, they had Andrew Wood was their singer. Yeah. Excellent album. You want to check out a great album? Check out the Mother Love Bone album. Really good. Screaming Trees was on there too. That was I Nearly Lost You was a song that I really liked by them. But mainly, like, this grunge stuff that I liked, it was just like the hits. You know, I never really got too deep into any of these other bands, you know, like, and their catalogs, except for Pearl Jam, you know, the first couple albums, Soundgarden, around that time. You know, like I said, Nevermind is just a bunch of singles. I mean, you listen to Nevermind, there's not a bad track on that because it's all written to be radio friendly. But if I had to pick an Alice in Chains album, I would pick Facelift over Dirt. But I know I'm in the minority with that, because a lot of people are like, what are you talking about? I like Facelift better. It's more metal. It's more up my alley. But the great songs on Dirt are great. I'll say that.
I think I would fall more into the after these bands like had their first couple albums. I don't want to say they're trendy at that point, but I guess they were, because I was too young. Like, I was 10. I was born in 81, so I was 10 years old when 10 came out. But I was too young. I mean, my brother listened to it, so I heard it. It was 94. I was 13 years old, and Vitology came out, and I bought it on tape. And then it was like, I was finally able to choose my own music. It wasn't like when my parents were playing or my brother was playing, even though he was playing the same stuff. But,
you were a perfect age though to really get into that. Like that's where, like,
kind of like sucked into the grunge culture. Cause
the
time it sort of hit more mainstream was probably around then, right? You know, Jeff, like you said, like 93, 94.
Oh yeah.
You know,
because, like, you know, I'm thinking back when I was like 13, 14 years old, man. When I heard Iron Maiden, I was like, oh, you know, and that was it, you know. So, you know, you hearing this music for the first time when you're that age, that's probably why you're, you know, not saying there's anything wrong with it, but that's why you're really connecting with it probably more than I was, you know, because I was
just that 5 or 6 year difference can mean the world.
Well, I mean, it was I was listening to, my mom loved listening to Chicago, and there's nothing wrong with Chicago. I love Chicago.
Oh yeah.
They're a great band. Hall and Oates, all that stuff. I was listening to all that stuff back in the day. Michael Bolton, love me some Michael Bolton. But it was so different. Because the world that I was experiencing was so much different than what was being presented on TV screens and everything. Like, life
that was probably part
sucked.
of its appeal to especially people your age. Like, oh, here's this whole like underground kind of thing that like parents don't know about, that our teachers don't know about. Here's something that we can really identify with.
Grunge concerts in like abandoned churches at like 1 a.m.
Literally garages,
Yeah.
I know there's that real famous Dave Grohl has this quote, which is from much, much later, I want to say in the last 10 years after he like went off and did his whole Foo Fighters thing, and he's super famous now. But he has a quote. He's talking about like shows like America's Got Talent, like, oh, all these kids are going up and like pouring their guts out just to be told they're not good enough. It's destroying musicians. What you need is to get a bunch of musicians in some garage in Seattle and just suck and suck. And then people come to see that, and that band becomes Nirvana, because that's exactly what happened. I love that so much, even though like I'm not really into the whole grudge thing. I have a lot of respect for Dave Grohl and his overall perspective and philosophies on things like that.
Back when he was Nirvana, he was just the drummer. I mean, nothing against the drummer, but like like
who knew?
Like when he came out with Foo Fighters, I'm like, and they had that like Mentos commercial like video or whatever, I was like, oh, those guys are lame. But the more I listened to him and stuff, and like he's a very smart person. To have two geniuses in one band is very rare.
Yeah.
You got to watch. Sometimes the drummers are the smartest people in the band.
I know. Russ is probably damning me right now. Oh wait, are we no cursing? Sorry, I forgot that.
No, it's fine. You can curse. We have plenty of cursing on the Rock Talk Show. It's all good.
I don't want any of your kids watching this and go, "Mommy, what's bitch?" They probably know everything already. They're connected.
I openly admit, even with my students, like, hey, when I'm not teaching, sometimes the filters come off and I say bad words. It's okay. I just had that talk with a girl earlier this week because she's learning this new song, and there's like at the end of every chorus there's an F-bomb. So I had to find like a chord chart to like send it over to the parents. Like, so here's the chords for the song that your girl's working on. Just full disclosure, there is language, and full disclosure, I don't care. I'm not offended by it. I'm okay teaching the song to her, especially because I'm focusing on playing the guitar part. We're not singing it, so it doesn't really matter. But just so you guys know, if you see a bunch of fucks here and there, don't fret. It's okay. It's okay.
They're like, sure. Well, how old is she?
Like 13.
There you go. That's it, dude.
Young.
That's like the age.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, you get into the more mature content. You get into something that you could resonate with, something that kind of, it's not all like fluffy butterflies and, that sort of thing.
A lot of the stuff we're talking about lyrically was a lot deeper than the stuff that came out in the 80s with the 80s hair band stuff, because that was just all about partying and
real surface level, just real dirty jams. Like, all right, let's just let's get wasted.
It was music for that generation. I mean, it was music for people that were already grown up at that point. Versus like grunge was music for, people that have just lived through the AIDS epidemic starting and the crack, cocaine, drug wars, and all the craziness that was happening, invading Iraq and like Desert Storm. Like there was a lot going on. I remember I went into a Kmart, and there was like a Saddam Hussein shirt with a bullseye right over his head, like there was a lot when you're living in it. Like I grew up very conservative Christian or Catholic, Italian Roman Catholic. And
just like us, we have a lot in common, John.
You're like, why does my dad and mom, who want to teach me like peace and love and understanding, also want to murder this guy in Iraq? Like, what the hell's going on?
Dude, I remember
Jam and
Soundgarden. 10 years, the same stuff was happening in the early 2000s when I was like 10, 11, 12, coming home on 9/11.
Sure, oh, yeah.
And like, it was a really conflicting time for 90s kids, and I think that stemmed well into the 2000s, which is why I think, John, I think you and I have so much in common, even though we're 10 years apart. We've kind of had a very similar, like at that age, having that sort of, cognitive dissonance going on of like being fed these two very conflicting bits of information. So yeah, definitely.
No,
well,
it was
grunge was the answer to that. Definitely in the '90s, that things weren't all peachy keen great.
Yeah, it wasn't all time to
like,
party. It was like, no, there's like some real serious shit happening right now. This is bad.
And
we
lyrically,
shouldn't be so happy all the time.
Going back to Pearl Jam 10, the lyrics of a lot of those songs, again, they don't deal with partying and driving fast cars.
No.
Yeah, is it Jeremy on that
struggle.
album? Is Jeremy on 10?
Yes.
Jeremy is on it, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
and that's like as far sad as sad can
The
get.
only time I don't really remember other videos that they did that were serious. Their videos were like them on the stage, But Jeremy, they did a video where it was like in the classroom, and they didn't show it actually happening, but it had so much more of an impact for somebody that's thirsting for like reality than any of the other bands could like produce. I mean,
yeah, and definitely more so than anything you would have saw in the later 80s.
Yeah. Yeah, the 80s were just
mainstream. Like if you look beyond the mainstream, then yes, there were a lot of rock and metal bands that were writing poignant lyrics back then, but mainstream rock radio wasn't picking it up. Just look at we're gonna mention our favorite band again, Iron Maiden. Iron Maiden, they don't write "Ooh Baby Baby" lyrics. They never did, but they're also not mainstream. Jeremy was a mainstream rock radio hit, In Bloom and Smells Like Teen Spirit. Even those songs are way more serious than I'm driving my car down Broad Street. I'm cruising and I'm looking for girls.
And I'm going to a party.
Yeah, I'm going to the party. I'm gonna rock and roll all night, and I'm looking for nothing but a good time.
Day. Yeah,
right.
I got you.
That has its place, and that's fun music too.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with it, but it's definitely the polar opposite of what the grunge culture was all about. I remember taking a rock history course in college to like really, especially since I got into like teaching and was doing the whole. I was like, there's so much of this music that I'm just so young and I don't know anything about. So I took a rock history course in college, and a big buzzword that came up when we got to the '90s and grunge and alternative. The biggest thing was counterculture. This whole idea of like a response to what was happening in the 80s and a way to purposefully deviate and to like further expand upon this generation gap from, people John's age that, like 11, 12, 13 in the early 90s from all the party generation of the 80s, like really trying to just distance themselves from it as much as possible. And that's visually, that's musically, that's lyrically, that's in virtually every respect. You're getting that. Yeah.
Almost every respect, because in 1994, because of too much partying, Kurt Cobain committed suicide.
Yeah. And a lot of people say that was the day that grunge died. I don't necessarily believe that. I think that grunge was just because of the angst that defined grunge. I think it was, like Kurt Cobain killing himself was just like it coming to its natural fruition.
Yeah,
it was a lot of depressing. The grunge opened the door for people to express their emotions, but they didn't give them a good outlet for dealing with them. And I think that's kind of where rock went afterwards. But
yeah, well, look at it. All the singers from all those bands, except for Eddie Vedder, they're all dead.
Yeah,
like a friend of mine.
Most of it was self-inflicted, right? Didn't. Because when Chris Cornell, did he kill himself too? Or
yes,
and that, even though that was a lot later, but still,
a lot later. But I mean, my friend Lenny Darren points out from the Rock Talk with DocRocker Facebook group that the thing that always stuck out to him with grunge is, with the exception of Eddie Vedder, all of them are dead. Kurt Cobain's dead, Andrew Wood's dead, Shannon Hoon's dead, Chris Cornell's dead, Lane Stanley's dead, Scott from Stone Temple Pilots, he's dead too. They're all dead, and all of them, I think, died because of drugs or something, along those lines. Except for Cornell committed suicide, probably, and I don't know why. I don't want to get into that. That could be a whole other conversation.
Oh yeah, it's going to be a whole bunch of
like famous people that have killed themselves. So,
oh god, yeah, that could be a 10-part series. Christ.
But like Lane Stanley.
Just it was it's very serious, but yeah, there's just so much of that happens in across.
Well, I'm saying because Chris Cornell, there's conspiracy theories around how he died. Same thing with
really?
Chester from. We could talk about it another time because it could go into like tinfoil hat territory really easily.
Oh, okay.
But
yeah, maybe we should.
to keep on the subject, Lane Staley, that was heroin, I believe. You know, the Wayland from Stone Temple Pilots, heroin. I think Andrew Wood from Mother Love Bone. I think I want to say he died of a drug overdose too. I'm not sure though. I'd have to check that out.
It wasn't just heroin like that they died from. It's connected to it and how it messed up the brain. I think during the 90s, there was a revival. Like you got away from drugs of choice like cocaine and Quaaludes or something, and you went towards like heroin. They went back to heroin, the thing that they already knew killed all the greats in the 70s and stuff, and they went back to it.
A lot of people say Kurt was murdered. You know, there's a whole documentary about
Courtney Love murdered him.
Oh,
what's that?
Courtney Love murdered him. Come on, everybody knows it. I'm being facetious, but you know, that's what I heard back in the day when it happened. People were all like, "Oh, Courtney, he was going to leave Courtney Love again, or something like that." There was a fight, and she shot him or something. You know, so
there is a really interesting documentary that details a lot of that stuff. I don't know how true it is. I can't remember the name of it, but it was on Netflix. I watched it a couple of years back. At the very least, it was interesting. Hey, you don't know, man. I don't know, but you're right. When it happened, there was a lot of talk about like, you know, he didn't kill himself or whatever, but you don't know.
Well, people don't want to accept the most obvious explanation usually. I'm sure every once in a while that something's a conspiracy and it was just played off well or something. But you know, in reality, it's connected to heroin. Like next you're gonna tell me that Bradley Noel was murdered by his wife or something in Sublime, you know? Like, but he was doing heroin. He OD'd on heroin.
Yeah, see, there's another band that was around, you know, in the early 90s. You know, it's not grunge, but it's alternative rock. And it was
kind of reggae.
Like, it was great. It was great stuff. Very reggae influenced. I still, up until COVID, when I was actually gigging, I still play What I Got by Sublime. How many years later? It still goes over with the bar band crowd that I play for, you know, so that says something, you know. Same thing with like, if you played Smells Like Teen Spirit right now to a bar crowd, they would enjoy it. If you played Jeremy or Even Flow or Alive, they would enjoy it. I don't know. I mean, I'm going to say you can play, you know, Outshine, but who the hell's going to sing that? Your brother probably can, Danton. Now he's got a high voice.
Yeah, Adam can sing anything. He's awesome.
He would give it he would at least, either him or a guitar player, Joey, they'd give it a shot. Between those two, man.
Yeah. And if they couldn't do it exactly as originally done, they would probably put some kind of clever spin on it and do something a little different with it. You know, make it a little goofy, make it a little silly. Just have fun with it.
Well, that's what we do. We make it all silly. It's all silliness.
Yeah.
You know, grunge also like went on to influence like the post grunge bands too. You know, like the grunge thing didn't like exist in a bubble. I hate to mention these two bands, but I will. Creed and Nickelback were the biggest example. For better or for worse, you know, they were totally directly influenced by the bands that we mentioned. For better or for worse, Creed and Nickelback. I won't say it again. and the new metal stuff.
Go with new metal. Yeah.
The Limp Bizkit, even some Slipknot. I can see.
We already have a new metal episode that we covered all that stuff way back when we first started this. It's one of the first episodes. We have so you know, those of you that are just tuning in recent weeks, go back, check out some of our older content. You know, get our whole big shtick on new metal, because that one was fun. I had a lot of fun with that.
You could really trace the history back. You know, like I said, Korn and Limp Bizkit, Slipknot, maybe even a little bit of Disturbed. You know, tracing it back to like the Bad Motorfinger album or Alice in Chains' Dirt and Facelift, and you know, Creed and Nickelback, whatever.
Yeah, I don't see too many people wanting to do that at karaoke.
Well,
I'm trying to think back to when we.
Every week. Although the Nickelback fans are hardcore, you know.
Yeah, which I'll never understand. That's just beyond my comprehension. Like Nickelback has a special place on my shelf of.
They're so mean, but they were popular at the time. Limp Bizkit was so popular but and then everybody decided they hated Fred Durst, and but at the time when these guys first came out, they were really popular.
Well,
we
sure.
were all loving the songs until like it became not cool to do it. Okay,
we all were loving the songs.
Some of us were still young and impressionable. I didn't have age and experience on my side.
Well, listen, we talk about that in the other episode, the new metal episode. We talk about Limp Bizkit. I do got to give them credit, man. They did something that I didn't think was possible. Same thing with Korn and Slipknot. I like Slipknot more now than I did back then. I thought the masks were ridiculous. I thought the masks were ridiculous until I actually started listening to them. I'm like, well, the masks are still ridiculous. There's 17 people in the band, but it's pretty cool.
There's only 9, Jeff.
Oh,
well. But it feels like there's a couple dozen.
You're saying like in 1994, Kurt Cobain died, we'll say, okay? Whether he was murdered or suicide, he died, which for whatever reason, to me, seemed like that's when it started to do the downslide. It was only a couple of years that grunge was on top of the world, we'll say. But
it had a reign.
He also at that point, Nirvana released the album In Utero, which to me was not really that good of an album. It was almost like they wrote it to be non-commercial, like let's write the worst stuff we can possible.
Yeah,
that's kind of how some of it sounded to me. It wasn't like Nevermind, and maybe it was like I'm not saying he said let's write bad songs, but he was probably saying like let's not conform like we
let's try to purposefully deviate from what's really popular and what's going to sell and what's going to get posted, what's going to top the charts, that kind of thing. Let's try to
he did. It was at the point where he didn't care, and I've read stuff.
Artistically, I can respect that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I've read stuff from Dave Grohl saying like, I don't think Nirvana would have been around after that album, or maybe one or two more, but because it was starting to like not work right. And again, it probably a lot to do with drugs. Same thing with Alice in Chains. I mean, they've gone on record saying like, they went like a couple of years without seeing their singer. Stone Temple Pilots kicked the guy out how many times? So you had all this stuff going on. And then, media, rock radio, and all of it, they moved on, into bands like Creed.
I think grunge's job was to murder the 80s, and they successfully did that. And once their job was done, they just kind of went away.
It was like a hitman, just come in, and then vanish.
Coolest motherfucker ever, but still only a small part of the movie of rock and roll.
Looking back on it, though, there are some really, really good songs. Like I always said, the cream will rise and be remembered. And this stuff is still played on rock radio. So it's legitimate, more so than, a lot of people do kind of like, especially now, kind of brush it off, almost 30 years later, like, nah,
Well, especially, Jeff, maybe more people like your age that like were already kind of into their own thing by the time it came out could have easily brushed it off as like, oh, this is just some popular 90s trend thing, whatever.
Yeah.
That, I don't care.
Yeah, a lot of us embraced it though, to different degrees. I do have to say, like, Alice in Chains is released. They did, I think, 2 or 3 albums since Lane passed away, and their albums are really good. Like I've heard, I can't remember the name of the album. They had something about dinosaurs or something. I don't remember, but the album was pretty good. They're still
Devil put dinosaurs here.
There you go. Yes, that's a cool album, man. It's good stuff. They're just as
cool
weird.
Name.
Yeah, they've always been a weird band, but it was a good album. That's the one I listened to. I didn't listen to the other ones. I think they put out 2 more, but they're not on the radar as much anymore. But they still put out good stuff, which is cool. I can't say the same thing about Pearl Jam. I haven't really listened to anything.
Pearl Jam changed so much. I think they kind of went with the flow of wherever time took them, and they adapted. And some of the stuff I like, some of the stuff I don't like. I haven't really listened to like their last album, but but that change even started back in the middle of grunge with Vitology. Like it was just such a different album than the other 2. Like Better Man. Like Better Man was not like a grungy song at all. It was just it was not like
It was a
it's like a slow dance song.
Mumbly song. We're
Yeah.
fried.
Oh, Yellow Ledbetter's
that-
mumbly.
That's where that guy from Creed learned how to sing. I think was from Eddie.
Yeah, no, it is true. He does. He did try to do his best at
warbly, grumbly stuff.
I've never been a big fan of that style of singing. It's never been my
I create my own prison.
There you sing. Now you're singing Creed. It's terrible. Okay, let's
Time to end the broadcast.
If someone wants to reminisce and go back, or someone wants to discover for the first time the grunge stuff, what album would you recommend? Let's say like the top bands: Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, Stone Temple Pilots. Give me an album from each one of them that you would suggest.
Well, for me, like I said, like I had to go back retroactively and listen to their older albums. So I would always say to start where I did, because it was more digestible than some of the earliest stuff. So like, even though 10 was their first album, I'd still go with that. You can't go wrong with 10. 10 are verses.
I would too. Yeah.
Pearl Jam. Never mind for Nirvana, because what you said, it's just all like
it's really accessible.
Pop hit songs. It's very accessible. People would still like that
riffs, stuff that anyone can enjoy, regardless of what you're into.
STP, Purple was my album. I know it's not like the quintessential grunge album, but I loved it. You know,
it's a great album.
They had Vaseline, Interstate Love Song.
Yeah.
The Big Empty, Unglued. There was just a lot of good songs on there.
If we name like the tracks off that album, like every one of them's a great song. You know, that's Core is a lot heavier than Purple, but Purple's still a great album. I mean, you don't have to. I don't judge like how the greatness of an album by how heavy it is, but I'm just saying
it's definitely a contributing factor, though. I would agree.
Yeah, well, with somebody like me that didn't come from that background, I had to go through grunge to work my way back to Metallica, and then be like, well, Metallica isn't like the end all be all. Black Sabbath is, you know, like it was all about it was all about Ozzy, you know. Like I after grunge had died is when I was or dying is when I got into
started going
Black
back
Sabbath and stuff.
Yeah, all the older stuff.
You know?
Yeah.
So
SCP, we would go with Purple. I would agree with that. How about Soundgarden? Super Unknown?
Yeah, Super Unknown.
Yeah, I'd say so too. Because like I said before, Bad Motorfinger is more of a metal album. Super Unknown is what is quintessentially known as a grunge album, like an alternative rock grunge album. I would go with Super Unknown. That has Fell on Black Days, I believe, Black Hole Sun. Yeah. Okay, yeah, that's a fantastic album too. Alice in Chains. I would say Dirt. I'd go with Dirt, or I'd go with that EP, the Jar of Flies EP, which is really good. It's a little bit more mellow, but that's an excellent album. But I'd probably
self-titled just because I don't think I didn't get. I was in more to Nirvana and Soundgarden and Pearl Jam at first. I came around to Alice in Chains mostly by hearing their stuff on the radio. Because let's be honest, that's how you discovered music back then. You know, there weren't no deep cuts that you could find by searching YouTube or something like.
Yeah, just find entire discographies of bands, and then like 5 other bands that relate to that band, and ones that live in different countries, and you know, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And then from there, I'd go back to Jar of Flies. Would probably be the second one. And Dirt was just, you know, it's a lot of these things, like the bands evolve so much, so it's kind of hard to put yourself in a new perspective and listen to their older stuff, you know. I'm not saying it was a bad album, it just wasn't one of my favorites.
If you do want to listen to like a cross section though, I would just go with the single soundtrack.
Okay.
Soundtrack.
Yeah. The movie singles? Yeah. Dude, that was State of Love and Trust on that album was like one of my favorite songs for years. I loved it. You know, and you could only get it by getting the single soundtrack. You know, it's not like
that's not an album. That's not a song that's on any other Pearl Jam album, right?
No, and I don't think Breathe is either.
So there you go. There's your albums if you want to get into grunge. Let's wrap it up with some final thoughts on the grunge era, I don't think it's coming back. Just like hair bands
I
will
don't think
never
it's
come
supposed
back.
to. Yeah, it's definitely it's like John said before, it's done its job. It came
Yeah.
in, it destroyed the '80s pop culture, and then it really it was like a nuke. It just like cleared the path for all the other later '90s alternative and new metal and all that stuff to kind of like really get its momentum by the end of the millennium.
Instead of having like, I don't know, 19 bands that sucked and one that's grungy, it turned into like all of them are grungy, and then they moved like all this, the horrible bands from the 80s were gone, so nobody wanted to do that music anymore, so that was it. They moved on.
Yeah, and
Grunge is a
as far as
bridge.
the '90s kids were concerned.
Bridge.
Well, I will say this about the '80s bands that did survive. They were the underground and the heavier metal bands. A lot of them actually got heavier, as almost like an answer to the grunge stuff. They just decided we don't care anymore. Testament, for instance, released I think in the mid '90s, two of their heaviest albums they've ever done, Low and The Gathering. They're almost like death metal, and that was in contrast of what they did in the beginning of the '90s, like late '80s, beginning '90s. Testament was starting to slow down and kind of mellow out because they were kind of trying to follow the Metallica Black Album trend, and then they were like, well, that ain't working, so we're gonna get heavier. Underground bands started popping up. Like metal was still not, I won't say alive and well, but it was alive. It just wasn't the hair band metal stuff. It was like the Slayers and the Testaments and Exodus, and Nevermore became a band in the late '90s. A lot of underground death metal stuff started back then. It was the counter to the counterculture, really. So that stuff, I think we got to thank the grunge movement for that, because that allowed them to like go back down underground, not care as much, and do what they wanted, and exploded back into the 2000s with some really, really cool, really heavy, really crazy stuff. And we also have the internet to thank, because now we can enjoy all this type of music whenever we want.
Yeah,
you can listen to whatever you want now. Nobody's pushing that. I
pull
mean,
your
people
phone
still
out of your
push stuff.
pocket, and you could find a treasure trove of all the music that you really need to, and then some.
Another thing that I think that's overlooked a lot, and somebody mentioned this on our Rock Talk board, is those big bands of the '80s. They almost all of them lost their singer at the beginning of the '90s. There was like Motley Crue lost their singer, so it's like, who's gonna go see Motley Crue with John Corabi playing?
Yeah, Maiden lost their singer.
Maiden lost their singer too. Like Skid Row lost their singer, and I'm sure there's more that I'm not going to pull off the top of my head, but there's all these like big blows to like the hair band stuff. Plus, there was power ballads galore, and it was a whole bunch of like overexposure. We're done with this. Life isn't that great. Let's do grunge. It was a whole bunch of things. It wasn't just MTV killed my favorite group, or Nirvana killed my favorite group. A whole bunch of stuff going on, and this was the answer. And that's fine. It's okay. Again, Pearl Jam 10. Go listen to it. That's all I have to say about that.
Fair enough.
And I do want to say that I don't hate all '80s bands. It was just like the I don't know, the stuff that was on MTV. A lot of it was just, I mean, metal bands were always great, like Rickrolled stuff. I don't know. That stuff was just
that like really popular later '80s stuff.
Yeah, it was due to go.
Yeah, I will be the first one to say, like, by the time 1989, 1990 rolled around, I've said it before, I'll say it again, I was done with 99% of that stuff, especially stuff that you'd hear on local radio, because it was overly produced. It was too slick. It was written by committee. It was
very, very sterile.
It was sterile. It was just it was, and then I remember who let me listen to Pearl Jam. The guy's name, he's on our Rock Talk board actually. Brian Zalicko was the first person to let me hear Pearl Jam 10. He's like, you need to hear this. This is something completely different. We were standing downtown Hazleton by Vesuvio's Pizzeria
Nice.
on Wyoming Street after a football game the one night on Friday night. He was like, get over here, listen to this. And we're standing by his car and we're listening to it. I'm like, oh my God, this is something new. This is different. And me and him were both talking about how the drummer wasn't just playing the normal things. He was throwing in little things here and there, just little bits and pieces of the song where there's different, there's layers to that. Again, listen to the album. Just go listen to Pearl Jam 10, and that's it. That's all you need.
And there it is.
I'm done.
Very good.
Perfect.